plebeians had triumphed against the tribal nobility. They utterly changed the constitution of society, which had previously been based upon a religion inherited from the cults of the ancestors and the sacred fire. This primitive tribal city-state was a mirror of the clans which conformed it, first by establishing a priest-king, and then with a republic in which government was reserved only for the chiefs of the clans. These institutions remained as long as the people governed by them truly believed in the religious constitution. The anti-monarchical revolutions and those which succeeded in transforming the once mighty Gens into a weak atomization of many smaller families all happened within the framework of a religious tribal polity. The revolutions deposing kings were a conservative reaction of priestly noble class against the centralizing pretensions of these monarchs, who allied with the then disorganized plebs, whereas the decline of the old clans consisted in a slow erosion of the tribal family, advanced by the cadet branches who wanted to inherit, and clients who wanted to break free from serfdom. Even if the first revolution had established aristocratic republics as the dominant form of government, and brought many innovations in law and political mechanisms, these republics had to face the consolidation of a new class who just didn't share the religion of the nobility, and thus didn't believe in the religious constitution of these states. The plebeian revolutions cleared the path for a new constitution for the polis and institutions which brought upon the rule of law and what we could call a first proto-liberal Western state, or at least something resembling it. These revolutions were made possible thanks to both the decline of the aristocracy contrasting with the prominence of plebs in trade, industry, the military and religious tradition. They smashed the privileges of this nobility by abolishing the caste system and changed the tribal religious constitution of polities into states ruled by a common law applied to all. When they lack constitutional legitimacy and the strength of belief wanes, institutions become a fragile, empty jar, which soon breaks because of the lack of basic substance. As the constitutional principles shifted away from the supremacy of blood nobility, states and societies morphed significantly, and with this there came to be a new dialectical confrontation between systems. The evolution of law reflects the victories attained by the plebeian class in codes such as the 12 Tables of Rome and Solon's Code in Athens. These said laws speak of the decline of the tribal aristocratic world and the ascension of the plebeian concept of the rule of law. We must be careful, though, to not idealize this period as a benchmark of individual liberty. The individual may have freed himself from the omnipotence of his family or the tribe, but he wasn't free from the omnipotence of the state. And the system, like Athenian democracy, a product of plebeian middle-class ideas, in fact deepened this. After this profound transformation, law was no longer a branch of religion or the heritage of clans. It was no longer unchanging, ritual, mysterious, but instead public, open to scrutiny and changeable. Legislators now followed popular will and not religious prescription. It now was common to all and owned by all, plebeian and patrician alike. Whatever was left of religious influences in law was still under pressure by the inferior class, who wanted its disappearance since it neither wanted, respected nor understood them. In Rome, the 12 tables, formally promulgated in 450 BC, were written in a time of profound social change, and even if they were written by patricians, they came to be only because of plebeian pressure and for plebeian use. From the patrician religious tradition, they kept the authority of the father over his children, who never ceased to be legal minors while he lived, inheritance laws, in which property passes to the next agnatus if there was a lack of sons, preferring the closest male relative through male lines than female relatives or male relatives through female lines, and emancipation and adoption as the initiation of a person into a cult. But it also introduced innovations such as the possibility of dividing property between brothers, limits to paternal authority and abuses over his child, and freedom to leave a will. Of course, Roman law would eventually evolve into Praetorian law and the Justinian Code, but what's important is that the 12 Tables is an intermediate development between archaic tribal Roman law and Praetorian law, and allows us to see how the plebeian revolution had already transformed ancient Rome into a new type of society. As plebs consolidated their power, more innovations were made in Roman law after the 12 Tables. Marriage between plebeian and patrician came to be allowed after the 350s BC, and the Lex Petelia Papiria of 326 BC finally abolished the nexum, or slavery through debt. Law was becoming less an application of tradition, known as mos in Latin, in favor of being a simple text, known as lex in Latin, seeking a natural order of things. This we will see in depth in a future episode dedicated to the philosophical revolution. In Athens, our other scenario for comparison, after coming from centuries of application of the oral tradition of the clans as law, the Code of Draco or Draconian laws were written in around the 620s BC to make law a more objective concept and applied by a formal court. These laws were enacted during a time of social unrest, but when eupatrids still had the upper hand as the dominant class. Draco, a eupatrid who became the first known Athenian to be given the title of legislator, had intended to keep all the harshness of the prescriptions of the old religion. The Draconian laws conserved the honors given to the gods and heroes with sacrifices, punished theft with death, and kept the integrity and autonomy of the gens, which, for example, could even take justice in its own hands in blood feuds, to avenge offenses made against them. During Draco's time, men still belonged more to the aristocratic clan than to the city. In 30 years, the people of Athens were fiercely resisting these rigid and strict laws, and change was to come with our friend Solon. Solon's code, which abolished the Draconian laws, belonged to a time when the organized middle class of plebs were winning the confrontation against the eupatrids. As such, Solon dropped the old tribal organization of society, but, make no mistake, he didn't promote outright egalitarianism in political rights, but instead instituted a hierarchy based on wealth. He also stated that there should be no legal distinction between the eupatrid, the plebs, and the recently freed clients. Solon has been seen by many as a liberator of the people, building the foundations of the rule of law and paving the way for more freedom in a plebeian republican system, though not yet the full democracy that came after Cleisthenes. He was praised by Lord Acton in his 1877 History of Freedom in Antiquity. Athens, which like other cities was distracted and oppressed by a privileged class, avoided violence and appointed Solon to revise its laws. It was the happiest choice that history records. The upper class had possessed the right of making and administering the laws, and he left them in possession, only transferring to wealth what had been the privilege of birth. To the rich, who alone had the means of sustaining the burden of public service in taxation and war, Solon gave a share of power proportioned to the demands made on their resources. The poorest classes were exempt from direct taxes but were excluded from office. Solon gave them a voice in electing magistrates from the classes above them, and the right of calling them to account. This concession was the beginning of a mighty change. It introduced the idea that a man ought to have a voice in selecting those to whose rectitude and wisdom he is compelled to trust his fortune, his family, and his life. And this idea completely inverted the notion of human authority, for it inaugurated the reign of moral influence. Government by consent superseded government by compulsion, and the pyramid which had stood on a point was made to stand upon its base. By making every citizen the guardian of his own interest, Solon admitted the element of democracy into the state. The new principle that constituted associated human life in replacement of the tribal religion of the ancestors was public interest. Government thus became more properly political by separating religious functions from politics and elected by some form of suffrage, as it was the only way to ensure the fulfillment of popular will. Whatever may be the best interest of the public does not necessarily follow from a fixed set of rules. Legislators of the age instead appealed to the ever-changing abstract concept of the will of the people. As Solon himself said, Athens does not have the best constitution, but the one which suits her best for now. The way to interpret this flexible variable, which didn't have the infallibility and immutability of religion, had been initially through an assembly as a consultation body, which later transformed into a legislative entity elected by suffrage, where everything had to be discussed and approved. These new plebeian republics or popular governments, constituted by the principle of public interest, kept the Latin name res publica and the Greek tokinon. Both words mean that which is common to all, or simply, the public thing. Government was no longer run by priests. It became more focused on efficiency and leadership. Magistracies were modified, creating new positions or changing existing ones. The career politician was born. In Athens, the archon position was maintained as a religious traditional office chosen by the gods, in practical terms, by luck. The new constitution instituted the strategi, which were proper politicians, chosen through suffrage for their ability, with the minimal requirements having been performed their duties as citizens, known in Greek as dokimasia. In Rome, the tribunes of the plebs were the rising figure. They were very similar to the Athenian strategos. Consulship was also transformed into a political office, stripping the religious functions away from it. Previously, the current consul would propose his candidates to the Comitia Centuriata, and they would vote without holding a debate. By this point, any Roman citizen could be a candidate, and there was a real deliberation and voting process in the assembly. This way, suffrage guaranteed that public interest was leading the government of the city, and not the whims of a tyrant or a particular privileged class. In the next episode, we will see how the plebeian constitution of the polis created new government systems like oligarchy, democracy, and a rebranded form of tyranny, all within these new republics, governed by the ideal of being made by the people and for the people, with the rule of law, but which also degenerated into excesses, and in some cases to a reversion to the caste system of privileges. Feel free to donate to this channel's Patreon to support the making of these videos. We will receive any donation from our patrons and sponsors with plenty of gratefulness, as it truly aids with our enterprise of popularizing historical and philosophical topics to reinvigorate the study of the Western tradition. We also invite you to leave a comment below and like and share if you enjoyed it. Stay tuned and subscribe.